In the gospel text, which is taken from Matthew chapter 22, verses 15 to 21, we will read about a controversy story. At the time of Jesus, the taxes which had to be paid to the Romans were really a bone of contention. There were different opinions and different groups who had their own opinion. One group, the Zealots, would like to have rebelled against the Romans physically, and so would sometimes undertake that rebellion and refuse to pay the taxes. There would of course be trouble, they would be beaten up and then later on forced to pay. There were other groups which supported the Zealots, but they were too frightened to be violent and did not want to get beaten up, but they would rather not pay because they would say that the Romans were a foreign power and they should not pay their hard-earned money to a foreign power. It is the context in which those religious authorities come to Jesus when he is teaching in the temple to ask this question about whether it is lawful and legal and right to pay the taxes to the Romans or whether they should not pay. Now, very clearly Matthew tells us that this question was a loaded question. In other words, they asked this question so they could trap Jesus in his answer. How would they have trapped Jesus? If Jesus says, yes, you have to pay the tax, then they would accuse him of being on the side of the Romans and against them, because he said you have to pay the tax. If, however, Jesus says, no, do not pay the tax, they could accuse him, and the Romans would accuse him of insurrection. They would say that he was stimulating the people to rebel, and they would call him a rebel. So Jesus could not answer that they must pay. He would be accused of siding with the Romans, of pandering to them. Nor could he say, you must not pay. He would be accused by the Romans of uprising and of rebellion. So they imagine that they have trapped Jesus because Jesus could not give either of the two answers. But there is another answer which Jesus alone could have come out with when he asks them for a coin with which the tax was paid. The tax had to be paid to the Romans only in Roman coinage. There were Jewish and Tyrian coins, there were Greek coins, but this tax had to be paid only in Roman coinage. And even though the ones who asked him had only God as God, in the temple precincts, the holy place, surprisingly, Jesus doesn't have that Roman coin, but they have it, already indicating that they are trapped by Jesus when he asks them for a coin and they hand it over to him. How is it if you do not believe that the emperor is God, that the emperor is the deity? How is it that you possess a coin which in your pockets about him? And so they hand over the coin. And Jesus looks at the coin and asks them, whom does the coin belong to? Because the emperor's head is on the coin. And when they respond that it belongs to the emperor, he says, very simply, if it belongs to him, give it back to him. However, what Jesus does is, he adds, do not give the human person to the emperor. The human person belongs only to God. And while the human person might serve the emperor, while the human person might serve the government, the human person does not belong to the emperor. The human person does not belong to the government. In other words, what Jesus is saying is that material things belong to the emperors and the Caesars of this world, and they must be given to them because it is their right for what they provide to us. However, the human person is only God's property, and belongs exclusively to God, not to another emperor or a Caesar or any ruler or government. This is what we need to ask ourselves whether we are doing. We hear the Lord's response to those who try to trap him, and we realize that while our money, sometimes some of our property in taxes might belong to the government, we only belong and exclusively to God.